A very good evening to all of you that will watch this eventually or watch this shortly. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for those of you that have positively and quantitatively engaged my previous few of the series of which was supposed to be four. It's now on four with one more. This is the penultimate one where I'm dealing with, in particular, I'm asking a fundamental question. Shaka, uShaka, and the Mefakani, myth or monster. But before we do that, I just want to address a few issues. One was for, I hope that Black South Africans are waking up. What we're dealing with is something quite alarming, something quite startling, and if we take this with a pinch of salt, if we take this as we generally take shit for granted, we will have a situation of the ANC like we have now 25 years, and jack hasn't been done in this country, particularly to alleviate the plight of the African masses who still, by the way, find themselves groveling, find themselves in abject poverty, living in the richest country by far, where the standard of life for white people, by and large, is the best in the world, where the kind of money, the kind of resources, the natural resources that has been pulled out of the ground in South Africa over the last 150 years has made Europe wealthy, while our people, who are the true owners of the land and its resources, wallow in abject poverty. There is no justice in that. There is no human justice, there's no social justice, and this needs to be and has to be rectified. Having said that, I think there's something far more insidious that's been going on, particularly led by Afriforum and their side neo-Nazi racist joker Willem Petzer. However stupid and foolish these childish neo-Nazi guys are, well, they ultimately are. It's been proven that races of their nature are generally people of low and unfortunately very lacking in intellect, lacking in intellectual capacity. This is borne out and endorsed by the hundreds of horrible little messages I get from these fascist, racist neo-Nazis on my YouTube when I post these things. First of all, just to the wingnuts, the racist right-wing wingnuts, whether you dislike my video doesn't make it less true. I speak the truth. And here it is. I will post this challenge again. In all the time that I have come onto YouTube and posted anything with regard to any historical, scientific, anthropological, paleontological arguments, there hasn't been a single historian, scientist, anthropologist, paleontologist, geneticist that has counter-argued anything I put forward. Not a single one. And I openly challenge people. I openly challenge the scientific study community to challenge me, to bring forward a counter-argument. And to bring a counter-argument that counters me, so that I myself, because I put a lot of work into ensuring that what I share with people is the truth. There's no assumption here. I don't make assumptions. And this is what Afriforum, Willem Petzer et al. Are putting forward. Rash assumptions, because they have a narrative, because they have a racist revisionist agenda in mind. And this agenda, and I say this again, is very insidious. And if we as black people and all of those right-minded, well-balanced people believe that this must be addressed now as a matter of extreme and urgency before this gets out of hand, then I think you need to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with here, because this has gone international. And I'd like to share this with you and then share with you the common issues which we've been dealing with over the last 3-4 videos. Just watch this, please.
Lay it out for the people a little bit, because it's not in the mainstream media here. Folks aren't paying attention to it, but they should be, because there's a very troubling situation unfolding over there, and it has been for some time.
Yeah, the government in South Africa is essentially saying that the white farmers in South Africa have stolen this land, completely ignoring the history of how these Dutch settlers came to this land and the pact they made with the indigenous people there, the Khoisan people. But you had these northern tribes that moved down and they've kind of essentially taken over, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to take your land or you're going to give us your life. Now, a little over a year ago, they've already done a large gun grab and things like that. And what's been happening, I've been covering the story a little for about a year and a half now. It's been going on. I've been having people on a lot and talking to and having in-depth conversations with people from South Africa who have actually been lucky enough to gain refugee status and move here to the States and then gain citizenship, and really sit down and hear their stories. And they're being brutally murdered, these farmers. Now, for a while, they had what, and it's still going on, called farmland attacks, where you would get these Africans would come in and they would find these these plots of land that they like, and they go in the cover of darkness in the middle of the night, and they tie up the women, they rape them, they cut their heads off, they beat them to a bloody pulp while the husband and sons have to watch. Then they move to the sons, and then they leave the husband last, sometimes cutting off their eyelids and things like that, forcing them to see these horrendous things, and letting them know, hey, you've stolen our land. But the fact is, though, is the Khoisan people made a pact with these Dutch settlers in the early 1600s, and they've been able to work great together this entire time.
Now, Bosjesmans is what the Khoi was called by the Dutch East Indian Company. And it's also established that these parts that was bought from the Khoi people was bought by the Dutch East Indian Company. Now let's take a look at an air photo of that. So here you can see this part here next to the mountain range, to the west of the mountain range. This is the part that was bought by the Dutch East Indian Company to farm with.
The interesting thing one notes is the narrative that's been put forward, and the narrative is there's a triple thrust to the narrative. Number one is that land was never stolen in the Western Cape, in particular from Khoisan. The narrative is repeated by both the right wing outside, those neo-Nazi fascists in countries like America, and then we have them in South Africa who repeat the nonsense that the Bosjesman and the VOC, the Dutch East Indian Company, purchased all of the land of southeast and southwestern Cape, all of the fertile land to quote-unquote farm. Well, we've proven otherwise. We've proven otherwise, that there was no collaboration no harmonious collaboration from the get-go between the Dutch and or the English and whoever else came along, between those and the Khoisan groups. In fact, that the Khoisan groups, we've proven, and as I'm talking, I'll post some stuff now, we've proven without a shadow of a reasonable doubt that the Afrikaners in particular murdered off anywhere between 1 to 2 million Khoisan people over a period of 150 years, including utilizing germ warfare, particularly the first smallpox epidemic, which wiped out 90% of the Khoisan clans and sub-clans, anywhere from Cape Town all the way through up to the Karoo. So this was a significant loss of tens of thousands of people, and we must be reminded there were three more such germ warfare attacks on the indigenous. The narrative that's been put forward is that white people, in particular Afrikaners, negotiated with Khoisan people, in particular the Khoi clans, for land. However, it is abundantly clear that there was no such negotiations. Well, on the contrary, one must be aware that at the end of around about 1670, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC as they were known, was singularly the biggest and by far the richest private company in the world. They had more than 150 merchant ships. They had 40 fully armed state-of-the-art warships. They had 50,000 people working for them, with a private army, heavily armed mercenaries of 10,000 soldiers. So having said that, this is what they required then was a Cape Town, which was the halfway point, the halfway house between Europe and Asia. They needed fresh supplies, and this put more pressure. So when on the development in the Western Cape, particularly Cape Town, in 1679, when Simon van der Stel came as governor, himself being half black, his mother was Madagascan. African Madagascan, but anyway, he wasn't the nicest guy of them all. In 1679, Simon van der Stel came as governor of the Western Cape, and he decreed that all land from Stellenbosch all the way into the hinterland, regardless and in spite of there being indigenous people like the Goringai Kwa, who bitterly complained that he was just appropriating their land. But you must remember, here, this guy has got an army of 10,000 soldiers, heavily armed soldiers, he can call on at any given time and wipe out anybody he chose at any point, at any time he chose, and decreed that all land, as far as I can see, was given to colonials. Why? Europeans who came first come first serve basis. This is proven, and I'm posting all of the literature, the reference material that you need to prove what I'm about to say. So land was not bought, land was given to whites, and there was one condition only, that within 3 years, if the land wasn't cultivating anything that was needed directly by the VOC, the land would be reappropriated and given to somebody else. And you must bear in mind that much later, this was 1779, by 1820, the Afrikaners, who were really deaf people, and I'll have a subsection in here calling who really were the Afrikaners, were too deaf, they couldn't farm, they just couldn't do jack. And this is why the 1820s the French Huguenots were called, because the French Huguenots knew how to grow grapes, knew how to farm properly, because these people, the Afrikaners that came from Europe, came from Holland, were not just peasants, they were just stuff. They weren't able to farm, they weren't able to do anything really. They were the dregs of society, like in a previous recording referred to them as human waste, and indeed that's what they were. However, moving forward, and this is exactly the situation, how land in the Western Cape was appropriated, regardless and in spite of the indigenous. And when the indigenous resisted, they were wiped out. They were wiped out by various means, which I've just mentioned a few. I think just moving forward, it's important that we ask ourselves a question at this juncture: just exactly who the Afrikaners were. And just to share with you, this is something written by Lord Randolph Churchill. Churchill was the father of Winston Churchill. He came to South Africa in 1891, and this is what he said. He spent 8 months in South Africa. This is what he said about the Afrikaner: the Boer family farmer personifies useless idleness. Occupying a farm of 6,000 to 10,000 acres, he contents himself with raising a few hundred head of cattle, which are left almost entirely to the care of the natives who he employs. He may be asserted generally with truth that he never plants a tree, never digs a well, never makes a road, never grows a blade of corn. He passes his day doing absolutely nothing beyond smoking and drinking coffee. He's perfectly uneducated. With the exception of the Bible, of course, every word of it, which is in his most literal interpretation, he believes with fanatical credulity. He never opens a book, he never reads a newspaper. His simple ignorance is unfathomable. And this in stolid composure he shares with his wife, his sons, his daughters, being proud that his children should grow up as ignorant, as uncultivated, as hopelessly unprogressive as he is, or himself. That's one. Another very interesting piece from a book which I'm posting now, and I'll just read this to you. The data collect, this was both the Union Health Department, which spoke about white people, and the data collected showed a high mortality among the children of poor whites. This mortality is attributed largely to insanitary habits and surroundings, which often lead to fecal pollution of water and food, with resulting infection and death. The dwellings were usually found to be defective, and overcrowding is considered to account for much of the disaster. I think this is also a very interesting piece here, which I'm putting up right now. The book is called Knowledge and Colonialism, 18th Century Travelers. in South Africa. And it's very interesting what it says. And I'll read this to you. I'll post it and share a few. The model criterion that is used, however, partly contradicts civilization hierarchy. For example, although the colonists, they're referring to Afrikaners here, are higher up the technical ladder of civilization, they are to most travelers also morally the most repugnant group. For Barrow and Liechtenstein, the Bantu-speaking Kafirs, Xhosas, and Beetjauyun, the Tswanas, are at the top of the moral hierarchy. Khoikhoi groups such as the Khonakwa can possess all sorts of qualities that make them superior to the colonialists, and the bastards who are descended from the colonialists and Khoikhoi. In this evaluation, the bastards are mainly the heirs of the European colonialists. In Levallian's view, they share with them the dynamic action, which determines their position in the civilization hierarchy and are moral repugnancy. Levallian sees in this group an ominous sign for the future. This clearly, and without a shadow of a doubt, I think in anybody's mind now, this proves the moral compass, or the lack thereof, of this group, particularly those who form the bulk of the Voortrekkers, in particular those who were domiciled in the Western Cape and were heavily engaged, as we know, in a very repugnant and inhuman genocide, which I've proven up to this point. But moving forward,
What I have to point out here is, firstly, the Khoisan did not ever welcome the Bantu people here. I'm actually having a conversation this Saturday on a live stream with a colored man who is a descendant of the Khoisan, so that should be very interesting. What actually happened was that the Bantu, when they came here in South Africa, have genocided the Khoisan in what was called as the Defikane, which was where they basically wiped out the entire population of the Khoisan.
Okay, just a quick chain of scenery, just based on what Willem Petzer said. Now, the fact that the Mefekan started in the 1820s, and Afrikaners and Europeans have been in South Africa since 1952. So more than 180 years had gone by before the Mefekan began. And the Mefekan began supposedly the Mefekan began in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's absolute rubbish. It's absolute ahistorical bullshit. And this is the sad thing about it. These people are so stupid, and they regurgitate the stupid issues over and over, and nobody challenges them. But I'm sorry, this is where it ends. I'm challenging you, and I'm challenging you with 100% fact. So, but let's just go to that Khoisan people never chose to accommodate Bantu, Nguni people. That is an absolute lie, and that they engage in genocide. I just proved that the genocide that was committed by white people. I just want to give an example of a simple fact. Nguni people, Xhosa people came, invaded Khoisan territory, and lo and behold, unlike what invasions all over the world in contemporary history that we know of happen, they adopt the language of those people they invaded. They adopt the culture and the traditions of those people they invaded. Vis-a-vis, and I'm going to post this now, it's called Ngiti, particularly practiced by the tribes Amatembu and Makwati, to name a few. It's the removal of the digit of the finger when a maternal senior dies in your family, and that is buried in the grave with the maternal senior. That is a Khoikhoi tradition which is going back many thousands of years. Circumcision, another thing they adopted. Language, they adopted the language, albeit they've only got 3 clicks, where it's Khoikhoi Khoa, but it's got 5 clicks, or 4. They've got 4 clicks, sorry. But more so, they've got 3 pure blood Khoikhoi clans within Amatlasa, Glashu, Sitatu, which is the last one, and then Sukwini, or the two before Glashu and Sukwini. It's got numerous sub-clans. Xhosa people can't even tell you how long these people have been in as a part and parcel of Khoisan. Just on the subject of Gwashu, the Springbok captain, Kolisi is Gwashu, and he's a pure-blood Khoisan. In fact, that is how Khoisan people, in fact, looked. Kolisi is a proud Gwashu, member of Gwashu clan of Amaxhosa. But you know what, having said that, just from the point of view of the brutality of what Africa or what Afrikaner people did to us, this gives you a glimpse of when our people try to speak, when we're in bondage, when our children, when our mothers who were enslaved after the men were murdered and brutalized, that when our people try to speak Khoi Khoi Khoab, this is the punishment we receive from these Afrikaners.
Yanks, it's drought. Drought. It's goddamn mutiny. That funnel in there.
As you can see, the 4 front teeth were forcibly removed with a hammer and chisel, as you've just witnessed now. And this is why today, so-called colored people within the so-called colored community in the Western Cape still remove the front 4 teeth, and people laugh about it. But this is the genesis and the origin, a very, very painful and evil, wicked genesis of how this came up. But you know, just the flip of that, let me just ask the Willem Petzers of our world, the Afrikaner people who've been in South Africa since 1650s, for 300 years. During that period, name me one group of so-called colored people, of Khoi Khoi people, of San people that you've absorbed into your culture, that is part and parcel, that have got all of the traditions, that has got all of the privileges that white people have, that Afrikaner people have. And I tell you categorically in your face, there's no such thing. In fact, the closest you guys came to that was Willem F.W. de Klerk's son. Willem de Klerk was married to a Muslim lady who had children from 2 other so-called colored women. Of course, he's a bit, he's a bit Diamaka, but that's the closest you came. The same de Klerk, Mariki de Klerk, Willem de Klerk, F.W. de Klerk's wife, referred to so-called colored people as children people, that we are children. This is your attitude. And then not only did you brutalize and murder us over a period of 180 years, anywhere between 1 to 2 million people in massive genocide, you then in the 1913 kicked us out. In 1950, the 1950 Group Areas Act once again kicked so-called colored people who were in possession of land, living in places like Clifton, Llandudno, Hout Bay, Camps Bay, Sea Point, Mully Point, Bantry Bay, living in Loader Street area, living in Cape Town, living in District 6, living in Harfield Village, Claremont, Constantia, etc., Steenberg, Upper Steenberg. In my previous episode, we proved categorically that ancient Sotho-Tswana and Nguni kingdoms existed for more than 1,000 years, even going back 2,000 years. We had the kingdoms in the north, in Mpumalanga, of Mapungu Gubwe, and later on you had Tulamela, which was more than 1,000 years in the north of South Africa, in Limpopo. And then we had in the we furthermore proved in the previous episode that a major Iron Age herder settlement was found in KwaZulu-Natal, the confluence of the Tugela River, called Undondwane, which was anywhere from 350 to 700 ACE, was operating there as a herder pastoralist that goes back 1,300, almost 2,000 years. So once again, here we have this argument, this repetitive, cyclical argument that Bantu people, Sotho-Tswana people marauded. These bands of crazed people came in the 16th century, which is a confounded lie. They were here for more than 2,000 years. and started just as Mefakan. The numbers are wrong, the history is wrong. But you know, the most important thing that's wrong is the fact that black people in South Africa actually believe that they did come here in 1600. Listen to this.
We call people Zimbabweans. We call people Malawians. We call people who come from outside Makwerekwere. Whereas we are Makwerekwere ourselves, because we come from where those people come from. None of us come from here. We came from the north and found the Khoi and the San here in southern Africa, and we settled here. The Khoi and the San welcomed us here.
Its rise, its...
Scientifically, all African people, what we know today as African people, originated in South Africa. Anywhere between 165 to 200,000 years ago. Migrated out of South Africa due to inclement weather, due to the polar ice melting during the last ice age, and migrated all the way. A huge group of people migrated all the way to Nigeria, and 87,000 years ago, Khoisan people, according to the Simmons Genome Diversity Project that's housed in Harvard University and accepted by the entire scientific and paleontological and genetic community. Khoisan people split from Yoruba people in Nigeria 87,000 years ago, and then there was a back migration into South Africa. So who was there first in South Africa? Everybody was first in South Africa. You can't say that if San people back migrated, Khoi people back migrated, Sotho people back migrated, and Nguni people back migrated, because they came from here. So nobody. The San and Khoi didn't welcome anybody. The San and the Khoi, we know the Botswana people are 68% Khoisan in terms of their mitochondrial DNA. Xhosa people are 50%, according to their genetic makeup. So here we have the nonsense that people came here. Everybody, all Africans are from South Africa. There is no shadow of a doubt. But I mean, the most important thing is moving forward from here. Moving forward in terms of dealing with the horrible racist revisionist narrative. And the racist revisionist narrative, this is where I come to, about Shaka. Shaka, uShaka, King Shaka, is without doubt the most vilified African in the history of Africans. I think if anybody were to sit still and ask yourself, which is the most vilified African in contemporary history, only one name comes out. Only one name comes out. I think historians, in particular white historians, need to be a little bit honest about themselves and ask, why is Shaka so vilified? Why is Shaka the bad guy? Why is Shaka the bogeyman who supposedly murdered anywhere between 1 to 2 million people? And what this piece very quickly, very easily, will prove categorically that Shaka was not a bloodthirsty, pathological, murderous sociopath that just went along and was bloodthirsty, just murdered people from this side to that side and chased everybody around. We're going to do the background to understand why Shaka is as vilified as he is, and to prove that the entire notion of Shaka murdering, or the Mefakan causing the death of 1 to 2 million people, is an absolute blatant lie. If anybody murdered anybody, it was the Afrikaners, and they were the ones who were engaged in massive genocide of Khoisan people, of African people all over South Africa, anywhere between 1 to 2 million people.
The crushing. These tribes that fled the Zulu either died out or formed kingdoms of their own with the same bloody tactics they had learned from the Zulu, and at an incredible price. Over the next 15 years, well over 1 million people would die as these refugees from the Zulu cut their way across the southern half of Africa.
Okay, this is the standard backdrop to uShaka that you get. Just blood, you know, it's just blood, crushing and skulls, bleached skulls. The imagery is very powerful, that this guy would just caused murder, and that black people in particular are just bloodthirsty animals and running around murdering 1 million people, etc. But you know what? they actually qualify it like this. And I want you to follow this very carefully.
Its rise, its fall, and its famous fight against the British. We'll see a small tribe become an empire. We'll see European factions playing out the game of power on South African shores. And we'll see a late post-Napoleonic army, well-drilled and equipped with modern rifles, be beaten by an indigenous population wielding nothing more than spears and hide shields. But before we can do so, we need to talk about sources. There's a lot about this period that we just don't know. It's not like the Sengoku Jidai, where it's simply hard to find translations of the more obscure records. In this case, we're dealing with a culture that didn't keep written records, so all we have to go on are scant accounts from European traders, and oral histories collected decades after the fact. Much of what we're going to tell you, especially about the early period we're covering, are best guesses by the historians and archaeologists who have worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of exactly what transformed the Zulus, a tribe perhaps as small as 1,500 people living in an area probably around 10 square miles, into an empire of 250,000 people, ruling over an area roughly the size of New Jersey.
But you see, here's the question, and they succinctly put it there. We just don't know. There was no eyewitnesses. There was no records. But if there was no eyewitnesses, there was no records. And trust me, people have studied the oral tradition, which has been written down in the oral tradition, can be found very clearly, very accurately in the prayer singing uShaka. Which was carried on from one prayer singer to the next, and I was very fortunate. I met Nkosi Goodwill Zweletini's Mbongi, his prayer singer, in the year 2002. I still believe he's still around. And this man is the custodian of the oral traditions of Shaka, and they wrote a book which is double-checked and triple-checked. And they've proven that this was indeed the praise singing carried forward from one bongi to the next. But the most important thing is here that scientists and historians just don't know. So how can you, if you just don't know, how can you arbitrarily pull out the figure of 1 to 2 million people? How can you arbitrarily? If you don't know, at least say, well, we assume. But you should have a basis for your assumption, and there is no. If your basis is nothing, if you don't know, you can't assume. In other words, then you making an assumption of something that was in all probability not there. But you know what? The most important thing is, let us begin at the beginning.
Now let's disperse this mob. That's too much power for one man to have.
And in this statement, I think therein lies the rub. It is clear to my mind that Shaka was deemed by both the English and Afrikaners, who were at that time, of course, voortrekkers, far too powerful. The messages that were coming out, and which I'll speak to a little bit later, was that he indeed was a highly intelligent man, well organized. His people were well organized. The follow-on, of course, later on with the battles of Isla and Luala, as well as Rokstad, the defeats by of major English regiments, which was massively embarrassing, buttressed this point. And this is why Shaka has been vilified, is because of his organization, because of his success, because of his intelligence, more so being an African, being a black man. And this didn't go well. But of course there was other factors, and the other factors was, of course, they wanted to set Shaka up, they wanted to set him up so that they can they can invade there. But let's begin at the beginning, and this is a very interesting thing I'm going to share with you, and I'll read it for you. So here we have a very interesting development. I'm going now. My argument is not going to be in KwaZulu-Natal and Shaka. My argument is actually going to be with the Khoisan and Xhosa. That is exactly where the Mefakam began. And this is very interesting, which I'm showing you now on screen. This is the Van Plettenberg Historical Society. This was a talk given by Mike Kanti, and the history about it in July of 2014. It's entitled The Deport Murders. But that is not what I'm interested in. It's further down what I'm interested in. And listen very carefully, and here you can see it on screen. Once the dispossession of the Khoikhoi or Hottentots has been completed, some were employed by the colonial authorities as foot soldiers. First seen on the eastern frontier during the Jan Vasveld rebellion, blah 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 blah, Pakenham, Vanderleer, used him for scouting, etc. When the Third Frontier War broke out in 1799, now listen to this, I'm going to go forward. By 1795, there was not a single legally recognized free Khoi community west of the Fish River. Most Khoi people lived as laborers in the old lands, now divided among the Boers, and even those who managed to maintain an independent existence in the remote corners of the frontier were insecure and without legal rights. So now, up to 1795, all of the Khoi, the free Khoi, were banished from the entire Western Cape and pushed into one single community led by Klaar Stearman, and they were then referred to as the Cut River Khoi. It was a mixed mash of Khoi from Gorna Kwa, Otanik Kwa, the Hessa Kwa, whole 9 years of grouping of people led by one person, who was, by the way, a freedom fighter. And I'll talk to you about it now. Unfortunately, and the sad thing that happened was that Klaar Stearman and the Cut River Khoi believed, sadly, that the English were there to save them. Unfortunately, that was not the English's intention at all. The English were there to support the Afrikaners, but more so after the Napoleonic War was to want to push English settlers all over the world. And one of the most important things at that end of this, going into the 1800s, was the third frontier war, or the third war of dispossession between the whites and the Xhosas. The third, the fourth, and the fifth. The fifth was a particularly brutal war which lasted only for a year, was in 1818. This, in fact, was the start of the Mefakan. What happened here was, it was referred to as the War of Nekrele, and this was a war where Stearman himself was on the side of the Xhosa, or many Khoi people who were disaffected moved on the side of the Amaxhosa and fought in this bitter war of attrition against the English. However, I'm about to put onto screen now what you can see. This was when Vanderleer met he was a general at the time, became a sir according to their stuff later. So I'd like to read what Vanderleer wrote in his diary on meeting Klaar Stearman during the third and the fourth war of dispossession against the Xhosa. Said Stearman to Vanderleer, "Restore the country of which our fathers has been despoiled by the Dutch. We have nothing more to ask, though we have yet a great deal of our blood to avenge." Stearman told him, this is Vanderleer, that the Khoi wanted to recover their lost lands and avenge themselves for years of oppression by whites. Now, if this just in itself is not a complete and total affirmation that it was not Xhosa Nguni people who raided and engaged in genocide against Khoi people, but indeed it was Afrikaners and the Dutch who stole our land, who murdered and engaged in massive genocide. So the argument put forward, the racist revisionist argument, should die a miserable death by now, that it was not Bantu people, but it was indeed Afrikaner people who engaged in genocide and massive land theft from our people. This proves it conclusively. Just for the benefit of time and to move forward as quickly as possible, I want to jump forward a little bit in time as well to a notorious letter sent from Sir John Cradock to the governor of the Cape Colony at the time on March the 7th, 1812, and this is what he says. "In my late instructions to Lieutenant Colonel Graham, I've pointed out to him the expediency of destroying the Kaffa kraals. laying waste their gardens and fields, in fact, totally removing every object that they could hold out to their chiefs and inducement to revisit the regained territory. I am very happy to add that in the course of the service there has not been shed more Kaffir blood than there would be necessary to impress on the minds of these savages a proper degree of terror and respect. Chungwa himself was tracked down to his secret hiding place in 1811 where, unable to rise from his bed, he was shot repeatedly by a party of Boers. As for the third community that had been involved in the Deport incident, the Boer frontiersmen, their future also laid elsewhere. A few stayed on, but many of those who have deserted their farms in 1802 did not return. The Frontier War of 1812 re-established the Fish River as the frontier with the Xhosa, so that the continuing conflict that took place there did not directly affect this area. Now, this is very, very important. At this point was the devastating Fifth War. And one must recall that the Amaxhosa, their traditional boundaries were all the way past going up to Jeffreys Bay. That is where traditionally the Xhosas and the Khoikhoi used to have their meeting place. So it was regarded as their territory from Jeffreys Bay all the way up to KwaZulu-Natal, where you had Xhosa, and then in the center you had Amatembo, and then to the east you had Amapondo. Those were the three major groupings of major Xhosa tribes before you had the Zulu, or what we refer today as the Zulu tribes. However, now after this war against the British and the Afrikaners, the Xhosa, now I'll keep this breakdown right now. The Xhosa of more than 300 clans and close to 700 subclans were forcibly removed 300 kilometers. All of them were forcibly removed in one serious move all the way to the Fish River. So here you had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people moved by virtue of war and conquest by the English all the way through almost 300 kilometers to the Fish River. I want to read this to you. This is what an Englishman said. A week later, the tide turned against the Xhosa. Lamle had retreated, while Chungwa lay ill and dying and was killed in cold blood while sleeping. Under the rule of martial law, Colonel Graham's orders were explicit. Any male Xhosa seen out in the open was to be shot, and the women were also killed. By the middle of January, Namle's people had been forced out of the Zervaart across the Great Fish River. Colonel Graham's scorched earth policy now began in earnest. Two parties of 100 men each were sent to destroy the gardens and burn the villages, wrote Lieutenant Hart on the 17th of January. Reflecting on the prosperity of the area, the soldiers had been called upon to obliterate. The gardens here are very large and numerous. And here also are the best garden pumpkins and the largest Indian corn I've ever seen. Some of the pumpkins are 5.5 feet round and the corn 10 feet high. On the following day, Hart recorded, 300 men went early to destroy gardens and huts, taking with them 600 oxen to trample the corn and vegetables. So here you had a scorched earth policy. Not only did the English move the Xhosa from their traditional land. This I'm talking about now. 300 clans and almost 700 subclans were moved 300 kilometers to the east. Lock, stock, and barrel. But not just that. To ensure that they moved and complied with a foreigner's order in indigenous land, all because they lost the war, they burnt everything behind them. All of the agricultural land, everything was trampled to the dust. Now, it stands to reason that Xhosa people, you're talking about 300 clans, close to 700 subclans, were pushed into Amapondo, into Amatembo. Amatembo themselves were a big tribe. And then you have Amakwati was pushed there as well. And you have all of the Khoi groups that were pushed into the small, tiny little zone themselves, who were pushed into the Amapondo. Here you're talking about a sizable sum of people, and behind them, and I will prove to you with this picture, as you can see, the voortrekkers, and of course we all know that after that war that ended in 1819, can anybody tell me what happened in 1820? The famous 1820 settlers. All of these 5,000 English families were brought in and were settled on the land which they now just destroyed and just removed all of the Xhosa and filled that land with English. 5,000 English families to move. They moved hundreds of thousands of people to the east to accommodate 5,000 English families, put them in the zone. You will see this map that I'm showing you now. You can see the line of the voortrekkers took to ensure that they went around the Xhosa that they're now displaced and not through it. So clearly it shows you the collusion of this. So meanwhile, the situation that you had in the Eastern Cape of the English forces together with the Afrikaners moving a huge tribe of people numbering hundreds of thousands at the end of early 1820, moving them up from all the way from Jeffreys Bay, all the way past PE, all the way past Grahamstown to the Fish River, uprooting a massive amount of people under the pain of death, being shot on sight, having all their farmland destroyed, utterly destroyed. And you're talking about thousands of hectares, hundreds of thousands of hectares of agricultural products being totally destroyed, and you had all of these people crushing into the Amatembu and all of their tribes, including the Makati, etc., etc. Then also pushing into the Amapondo. So here you had a situation of resources which before was readily available, and now people had to compete fiercely for the same resources that just a few months ago was readily available. That's number one. But at the same time, in what we know today as Maputo, even though that in 1833 the English had abolished slavery, the Portuguese were happily enslaving on the Indian Ocean slave route, and in particular from what was referred to as Delagoa Bay, which is Maputo as we know Maputo today. You had significant slave raiding into the hinterland between the border of Swaziland and what is Mozambique into KwaZulu-Natal, and dragging tens of thousands of people. In fact, if you have a look here you can see is a map. So and slave trading started in 1818. And if you just look correctly, it's exactly at the same time, 1818, 1819. Look at 1821. 12,272 people were captured as slaves in this region, and that is where they were drawing the slaves. They were drawing these people from. So you will see at the time of the 1820 incursion and movement of Xhosa people, there was also a pressing on the top from Delagoa Bay, or what we know today as Maputo in Mozambique, with massive, heavily armed slave raiders going into the hinterland and pushing people down into KwaZulu-Natal. And as you can see, between 1818 to 1830, 68,000, almost 68,000 Africans were from that region were enslaved. Even way past the deadline of 1833, the abolition of slavery in 1883, was supposedly global. You will notice that slave trade in the Indian Ocean was going on until 1855. And here you got, in between that 60,000 and here you got more than 550,000 people that was enslaved from that alone. Interestingly though, you will notice that the number goes down 1834, 1835. And the simple reason that number reduced so radically was that starting in 1831 was that Udingane sent a massive army. He first sent one army in 1831 and 1832 Then in 18, when they continued, especially Shoshange, when Shoshange continued with the slave trade, he then went up there personally in 1833 with a huge army and ensured that they were wiped out and the Portuguese were sent packing, including the Shoshange of the what we know as Shangaan today. And that is why you see the numbers drop 1833. So just to recap, on the one hand, you had this huge press up at the bottom between the English and the Voortrekkers, and on the top you had the Portuguese pushing massive raids, heavily armed raids into the hinterland in KwaZulu-Natal, and all of a sudden, all of these people that were in KwaZulu-Natal were now in a kind of a pincer grip. The one part that also I'd like to add into this mix, and we've got the South and the North press, as I've just mentioned earlier on, which really started the Mefakane, as we know, and bearing in mind that the Mefakan is actually a Xhosa word and not a Zulu word. And that's exactly how it started. It started with the Xhosas and the English and the Voortrekkers. But having said that, just very quickly, one must bear in mind that we had a number of Voortrekker groups, heavily armed people going into the hinterland, going in through what is known as the Free State and into Gauteng, what is known as Gauteng, Northern Cape, and of course through into Mpumalanga and the Northwest and so on. What is not documented, unfortunately, is what these guys did, because it is clear as day wherever Afrikaners went, they left thousands and thousands and thousands of dead bodies behind them. I will give you two examples. This wasn't, and please, I'm saying again, quote me, that this was not during the time of the Mefakan. This was a little bit later, in the 1850s. Here's a case of a Dutch reform, Beersheba in the Free State, where was a mission station, and there were more than 2,000 Basotho people living there. With the mission, the pastor was Reverend Samuel Rowland, and the Afrikaner commando just came around one morning on the 23rd of March 1858, surrounded the mission, demanded everybody give their guns in. Once the guns were handed in, they murdered everybody. They killed 2,000 Basotho in one go, in one morning. The Reverend was taken prisoner for no good reason. His furniture was looted. His farms were broken up. His 4,000 cattle belonging to the Sotho was confiscated. 2,000 sheep and goats belonging to the Basotho was confiscated and shared amongst them. All the fields were burned, and Fontaine was divided into 61 farms shared by the commando members and their families. And those farms are still in possession of Afrikaners to this day. There's another story a little bit later of a similar style of one knows anything about the Makapan's Hut or Makapan's Cave in Limpopo, where thousands, many as upwards of 4,000 in Ndebele, who were chased by the Voortrekkers into this and had a standoff and a siege. And the Voortrekkers lost 10 people, but more than 4,000 Ndebeles were wiped out. Men, women, and children completely murdered, every single one. So this is where they were chasing King Mokopane. And this is well documented. These are documented stuff where Afrikaners, wherever they went, you had a case of dead bodies. So yes, it's assumption, and I will categorically say it's assumption, that it was assumption that there's no record of, that we're aware of course, that as Afrikaners went through Free State, as they went into KwaZulu-Natal, as they went into Gauteng, I am of the opinion this is exactly what they did, and this in itself put pressure on the tribes, in that region and crush the entire event into KwaZulu. So finally we come, I know it's been long-winded, but I think we cannot discuss uShaka or anything about Shaka because there's just so little information about him. Go to any book, you will just find they'll talk about everything else, everyone else except Shaka, because there's just little tiny amount of information available about Shaka and loads of assumption, but nothing accurate. So what I want to do is I must do this, but just to draw a backdrop of Shaka in terms of what they were about and so on. Another more important element in terms of understanding the macro conditions, the macro environment which led to the so-called Mefakani, and we've already proved fundamentally and substantively that it was a combination in the south, in the southeast and southwest of South Africa, in the Eastern Cape. What was the Eastern Cape? Was between the English and the Voortrekkers, pressing the Maklasa, a huge tribe of 300 clans, or close to 700 sub-clans, moving them east more than 300 kilometers in taking away huge tracts of land from them, devastating their crops, etc. And then you had Dalgoa Bay, you had the Portuguese together at a much later date were the Shangaan, who were infiltrating and raiding into KwaZulu-Natal and stealing tens of thousands of indigenous people, as capturing them as slaves. But the one important element that we mustn't lose sight of, and this was the devastating effect that the Griqua had on the indigenous population. Griqua, bearing in mind, originated from one guy whose name was Adam the Cock, so-called first, was a emancipated slave, was a cook in Cape Town. So married a Griqua woman, and then just arbitrarily decided he will call his tribe Griqua. Now, there is no royalty whatsoever. The fact that the Griquas today claim royalty is bullshit. It's absolute crap. They're a bunch of loonies and klopse. They have no royalty whatsoever. They're completely fallacious and completely fraudulent. But anyway, that's besides the point. The Griqua preceded the Groot Trek movement by a number of years, and they had two streams of people. One stream led by Class Afrikaner went to the Orange River, and they decimated 12 complete clans, almost totally decimated 12 complete clans of Namakwa all the way from following the Orange River, from what is today Kimberley, all the way down to the mouth of the Orange River. Devastating. Here we're talking about, but not just devastating. They were murdering the males, and then they were capturing the children and females, because this is the demand of slaves that both Afrikaners and those who were in the Western, domiciled in the Western Cape, wanted as slaves. And this is proven fact. But the question that flows from this is, yes, they were trained militia during their tenure in the Western Cape. They were trained marksmen. They helped the Afrikaners. They helped the Dutch. They helped the English in terms of their wars. So they had weapons. They were trained. But where did they get the ammunition from? They obviously have to get the ammunition from somewhere. You can't go kill 12 clans. And you have to have ammunition. You have to have gunpowder. Where did they get this gunpowder from? This is how they obtained the gunpowder, was by trading in female and children slaves of Khoikhoi, of San, of Batswana clan, many of the Batswana clans, even the Basotho clans as well, and Korana. They devastated the Korana as a matter of fact. And this is also as a matter of record. But to the east of them, you had another two groups. One headed by Andries Waterboer, the other one headed by Dam Kok, who was on the line of Kok. And these two guys, together, in 1821, in Klaarwater, which was in the Northern Cape as well. And the history around this guy is just very odd. The guy's name is John Thomas Melville, was born in England, was appointed was appointed as a government agent. This is what you get from him. He was appointed as a government agent, and he was sent to Klaarwater. But he arrived in Klaarwater in 1821 with his family, plus numerous ox wagons filled with guns, ammunition, which is gunpowder, bullets, and brandy. And this is what he traded with these two Griqua movement captains, who then went into the interior and guess what? Murdered indigenous men like Korana, Basotho, Botswana, Bapedi, as well as, of course, the Khoi and San, and then murdered the men and gave and then sold or bartered the females and males and young children as slaves to be used in the Western Cape. So here you had this pressure from the top, once again, from the northeast, the northwest, pressing down on KwaZulu-Natal. So you had Delagoa Bay, if I may just recap very quickly, Delagoa Bay, which is Maputo as we know today. The heavily armed, heavily fortified and soldiers of the Portuguese raiding inward into KwaZulu-Natal. You had the force of the combination, the Voortrekkers and the English pressing down Maxhosa. More than 300 the tribe of more than 300 clans with hundreds, close to 700 sub-clans, pressing them into the Abatembu now pressing into Amapondo, and on top of them you had these savage Griqua hordes who were heavily armed and had no inkling about wiping out numerous clans, and the history on that is clear. Okay, so just to begin with the background to uShaka, and if you look at uShaka properly in terms of my discoveries, if you look very carefully at the map which I've drawn, and I've established this map myself, I think it's very, very instructive and important to understand my sources for this. My sources predominantly was praise singing, a group of praise singing of uShaka going back, carrying forward from one Mbongi to the next, studying literature, which I will show you, the available literature or so-called available literature. And when one looks at the amount of clans, and I've done this exhaustively, the amount of clans. The very big one was Ndwandwe, which was north of where uShaka and the Matetwa was. Matetwa was another big one, but the biggest clan out of them all was the Hlubi. The Hlubi was in the northwest of KwaZulu-Natal. The Kumalos, who were the root clan of Debeles and the Shangane. You had smaller clans in the north of Bele, Zizi, and then Angwane, which was a junior clan to the Ndwandwe. You had the Matetwe, the Zulu, of where uShaka comes from, and the Kwabe. The Kwabe was a sister clan to the Zulus. And then you had three smaller clans, sub-clans south of where the Zulus were Mkize, Sitole, Tuli, and then the big one down in the southwest was the Buthelezi clan. But there were four clans that uShaka had an outright victory from in terms of his wars. Of course, first was the Ndwandwe, who we fought. They were bitter enemies because Zwide of the Ndwandwe murdered. So once again, when you're looking at what Ndwandwe, who was the imperialist-minded under Zwide, who in fact was the one who started the inner KwaZulu-Natal Mefakan, which is a tiny little Mefakan, but I'll explain that to you. He first of all killed the king of the leader, the king of the Kumalos, That is when Mzilikazi ran away, who was a prince of the Kumalos, ran away to seek refuge amongst the Zulu with uShaka. You had Shoshange, who ran away as well, all the way to Delagoa Bay or Mozambique to set up the Shangans there. And this was as a direct result of what the Ndwandwe under Zwide did. Zwide, once he killed off the Kumalo, he then went after the Mtetwa, who was led by Dingiswayo. Dingiswayo himself had uShaka as a protege. uShaka was a senior lieutenant in his army, And when the Ndwandwe and the Zwide ambushed and murdered Dingiswayo, it was then now that Shaka had had to avenge the Matetwas and Dingiswayo's death with Ndwandwe. Now, just on the subject of the amount of clans, and I want to just reiterate again that for the benefit of our understanding of how many people really was in KwaZulu-Natal at that point. Let's just look. The biggest clan was the Hlubi, the second was the Ndwandwe, the third was the Matetwa, and Shaka was a tiny clan at this point. We're talking about not even 1,000 people. And then to the south we had the Buthelezi clan. So these were the four major clans. Then we had and of course we had smaller clans like the Amazulu, Kwabe, who was a sister clan to uShaka. Then you had beneath him, you had the Mkize, Sitole, Tuli. In the north, you had the Bele, the Zizi, and then the smaller junior clan headed by Matawani of the Mngwane. They were a sub-clan, a sister clan to the Ndwandwe. Shaka then fought four major wars. One was against the Majola. He defeated the Majola. He defeated the Mbata. He defeated the Ngonya Yamieni. And he defeated the Mbekane. Those were the four clans. It was an outright defeat. Outside of the major battle he had with the Ndwandwe, where he virtually wiped out most of them, Ndwandwe, in fairness. And then we had fights with Buthelezi. He never defeated the Buthelezi. uShaka never defeated the Buthelezi. In fact, the Buthelezi were absorbed into the nation of Amazulu through Shaka's ability to more as a politician than as a warmonger. The Buthelezis joined more as a strategic alliance between themselves and uShaka. Shaka fought in the south. He fought Amampondo on a number of occasions, and on a number of occasions he never won, simply because King Faku was just far too smart. He was the one that the minute Shaka's forces came in, they were long gone. They took their cattle, they cut their fields, and there was nothing left for Shaka. So Shaka was literally chasing shadows, trying to fight for them. Another singular battle that uShaka had was with Matiwani. Matiwani, after defeating the Hlubi, after then incorporating the sub-clan Zizi, Bele into his collective of the Ngwane, he then moved with his entire tribe, under the false impression that Shaka was about to attack him, moved into Bapedi territory, who at that point was under King Sekhwati, and then ran into the Batlokwa clan of Bapedi, defeated them, and now moving south, because of course he was well aware that Sekhwati would send his forces after him, moved into Basutu territory, fought with a regiment and defeated a regiment of Mosheshe of the Basutu. Immediately, King Mosheshe was under very good terms with uShaka. Sent a message to uShaka that Matiwani and the Ngwane was in Lesotho, in Basutu territory. Shaka dispatched a regiment who then defeated Matiwani. Matiwani then broke up, and the remnants of his force ran all the way into the Eastern Cape and attacked the king of the Abatembo, scattering Namatwi. He defeated the Abatembo. So if one looks at the big picture here, the only force that actually engaged in multiple area attacks and devastation of anybody was Matiwani of the Ngwane. The crystallized nucleus of the so-called mini Mefakane was started by Zwide and the Ndwandwe, who first attacked, as we know, the Kumalo, and then assassinated the king Dingiswayo of Matetwa. uShaka then developed this battle with them, defeated Ndwandwe eventually. Now, coming back to all of this, and when we look at all of the tribes, all of the clans that were in KwaZulu-Natal at that time, there was no ways there was even 1 million people in that place. If you take the biggest clan, the biggest tribe, Ndwandwe, Kumalo, Hlubi, and Buthelezi, the four biggest ones, Let's say there were 100,000 in each of them. So you had 100,000 in Duandwe, you had 100,000 in Matetwa, you had 100,000 in Kumalo, you had 100,000 in Hlubi, you had 100,000 in Buthelezi. That's 5 clans. That's 500,000 people. All of the other clans, and I'm saying I'm giving 100,000 to each of these tribes, and I can tell you this: when Dingaan was defeated, the entire Zulu nation was only 50,000 strong. The entire Zulu nation was only 50,000 strong. This was when Dingaan was defeated. So coming back to this, so even if you take the 5 biggest tribes and you give each of those tribes 100,000 members, that's 500,000 people. And if you give the same amount to the others, so that's 1,000,000 people. At worst, and we know Shaka had 5 major battles, 4 of them which he defeated, and I will say it again: the Majolas, the Mbatas, the Yamenis, and the Mbekanes. Those were 4 tribes he defeated. And then the Buthelezi, he never won a battle with. He never won a battle with Amapondo. So he didn't. Who was Shaka supposedly killing? And now this leads me to the other quote-unquote people who apparently were eyewitnesses to what happened with Shaka. And the first person that we must make mention was an Englishman by the name of Finn. And you can see I'm just posting a supposed diary of Henry Francis Finn, who from 1826 till, which was quite late, 1828, he was actually, from 1826, he was living in and around KwaZulu-Natal. He oftentimes went to see Shaka. He spent more time, believe it or not, with King Faku of the Amabondo, and that's very clear. But here's the funny thing. This guy supposedly was scripting and scribing all of the things that was happening in terms of his travels. And there was him, there was another fellow, Blackwell, and there was another character by the name of a Jewish Englishman by the name of Nathaniel Isaacs, who was also there at the time. But all 3 of them were more interested in the concept of this wealth. It must be Shaka so powerful, it must be wealth. They were interested in ivory and were interested in gold. When Shaka's uncle Mbikwana came to fetch him the first time from where Durban was today, that uShaka was prepared to see them, they spent the whole day. This Farewell guy that was with him, his friend, spent the whole day searching for gold in the river, in the Umgeni River. But unfortunately, all they found was mica. So the same story you had with Finn, and Finn. With Nathaniel Isaacs. And Nathaniel Isaacs, and I'm just posting this here, wrote a book called, and published in 1836 in London, Travels and Adventures in Eastern Africa. And he became the standard by which people measured uShaka. And I'm reading this epitaph with you. Many of the tales emerged from the diary of Henry Francis Finn, a British adventurer who lived at Shaka's court. The evidence exists to suggest that Finn greatly embellished this account. Nathaniel Isaacs, who I just mentioned now, the book you can see on top there, another British author who wrote about uShaka, urged Finn to make the Zulu leader as bloodthirsty as you can and endeavor to give an estimation of the number of people he killed. This again is consistent with the histories around there. Fast forward 100 years, 120 years, but just going back to Finn quickly, I take you back to Finn. Finn apparently had a diary, and a diary was kept in a folded elephant ear, and he took crushed plants and he wrote in this diary. Supposedly, this diary was supposedly buried with his son, and then somebody came 50 years later, dug it up and rewrote it. Now it's very interesting. If you remember, I just mentioned there was four tribes that Shaka had a massive defeated. And they talk about, Shaka, this is in 1826, we left Shaka, blah, 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 blah. It was not long before remains of 4 tribes with their chiefs, amounting to more than 2,000 of both sexes, came to live under me. Many had made their escape when at the point of being put to death by the Zulus. But by merely notifying such arrivals to Shaka, the refugees were allowed to reside with us, reside with us. Now, this kind of is similar to the oral traditions, but at the same time, this flies in the face of Shaka being this bloodthirsty guy. People, 4 tribes, the remnants of 4 tribes come and live with this guy, Finn. And he tells Shaka about it, and Shaka does nothing about it. So I don't know about this bloodthirsty story that they want to portray Shaka as being, but just moving forward quickly. In 1955, a writer wrote a book called Shaka Zulu, and this was more novel. I kid you not, this is more novel. However, and this is what's written about it, a romantic novel which, with astounding gullibility, was accorded instantaneous historical status. Least of all by Omar Cooper, who was at that point a supposed historian. So I'm sure you can see how the story gathered momentum. But at the same time, in 1966, and I'm just posting this, Donald R. Morris, who became the authority, quote unquote, the authority, the historical authority on uShaka, did a book called The Washing of the Spears. It's a massive book of 1,200 pages. I read it twice, many years ago in the 90s. And this was a guy who for 17 years was with the CIA. And during the period of him writing this book, he was a CIA operative. And he was trained in naval intelligence and Russian languages. So he fought in the Korean War, he earned 2 medals, as you can see it there. He also stayed in Berlin, Paris, Kinshasa, in Zaire, and Vietnam. So, but his writing apparently became the standard, the quote-unquote gold standard of what uShaka was about. And if you can see in the top left, it's his first cover, 1966, 2 years later, a new cover, another cover a year later, and then it moved to 1994. So you had all of a sudden this book being revitalized for whatever reason, that had 6 covers over the period of its existence, which is very, very interesting. However, just moving forward to more serious matters, what I've done is I have taken a balanced view. What I mean by a balanced view in terms of having a look at the academics. What are academics saying? So I've taken from Finn to Nathaniel Isaacs to the Ronald H. Morris and of course Ritter, and I looked at what are other people saying, and I think some of the very interesting stories that comes out, which I'm just putting up here now, is the case against the Mafakane. And here, Julian Cumming, who is a PhD, studied significantly the issue of uShaka, and he says, when we consider all the applications of the expansions of Bantu-speaking people, there can be no doubt that the theory of stagnation has no basis whatsoever. He goes on further to say the Mefokani is a tenacious and still evolving multiple theme in the historiography of the apartheid state. Its basic proportions are integral to a white settler liberal history, which gestated over a century before Walker coined the term Mefokani in 1928. These refined legitimations of older race historiography were taken up and caricatured by the propaganda and educational apparatus of the Foster and Botha regime. So here we can already see that Shaka was being set up. First of all, is it no coincidence that we had the depopulation? We had the depopulation of the Eastern Cape, the miraculous depopulation. And you know what? We depopulated ourselves. We had the depopulation in the Free State. We depopulated ourselves. In KwaZulu-Natal, we depopulated ourselves. And of course, in Gauteng region, we depopulated ourselves again. It's like we caused, as black people, we caused apartheid. And this is what they're saying. This is what these revisionist, racist, neo-Nazis are saying. That we as black people actually caused apartheid. This is about removing the victim to the perpetrator. But having said that, I think without a shadow of a doubt. And this was a few years ago, where Zulu legend was neither a genius nor a tyrant. And I think Dr. Dan Wiley wrote a book called The Myth of Iron Shark and History. He says this categorically, and I'd like to share this with you. The evidence suggests that whites invented tales of Shaka's brutality in order to justify colonial expansion. These eyewitness accounts encountered Shaka at a time when it made sense to denigrate African leaders as much as possible, and a monstrous image emerged, says Wiley. Just to conclude with two pieces, and I think which will give one a very balanced view as to what exactly was transpired in Cobbing's piece, The Case for the Mefakani. He writes this in 1984 paper, which you'll see on screen now. The Case for the Mefakani. For one thing, he says, the factual foundations on which it is built, especially for those of Thiel and Ellenberger, these so-called historians preceding him, are those of shifting sands. And I think here Afriforum's straw man comes to mind. Rasmussen's remark about the Ndebele almost certainly applies more strongly still to the Ngwani, the Hlubi, and the Tlokwa. One can adduce, he wrote, examples of false associations between almost every possible combination of unrelated events between 1828 and 1832. Untold violence has been done to the correct sequence of events, making intelligent interpretations nearly impossible. Accurate data, however, was never absolutely essential in a concept where it rapidly became a device of propaganda. The idea of the Mefakani was evolved at the beginning of the century to help historians to evade an analysis of the confrontations between the races in the 19th century South Africa. While black self-destruction was heavily overexposed, often on the flimsiest of evidence, as the impact of British and Boer expansion on African societies was systematically downplayed, usually by ignoring it altogether. He also points out that the myth of mass killings by uShaka was started by an English adventurer, Nathaniel Isaacs, who was promised ivory by uShaka and at the very last moment was sent away. And in his book, Travels and Adventures in Eastern Africa, is where the myth was birthed more out of rage than fact. Just before I do the final conclusion in my roundup, I'd like to use a thesis by Dr. Daniel Wiley, which he done in December 1995, entitled, which you can see on screen now, White Writers in Shaka Zulu. And I think he succinctly says it. The figure of uShaka looms massively in the historical and symbolic landscapes of Southern Africa. He has been unquestionably credited in varying degrees with creating the Zulu nation, murderous bloodlust, and military genius, so launching waves of violence across the subcontinent, aka the Mefakani. The empirical evidence for this is slight and controversial, but more importantly, and however, Shaka has attained a mythical reputation on which not only Zulu self-conceptions, but to a significant degree, white settler self-identifications have been built. This study described as comprehensively as possible the genealogy of white Shakan literature, including eyewitness accounts, histories, fictions, and poetry. This study argues that the vast majority of these works are characterized by a high degree of incestuous borrowing from one another and by a process of mythologizing, catering primarily to the socio-physiological needs of the writers, so coherent in this genealogy that the formation of an idealized notion of settler identity can be discerned, especially through the common use of particular textual gestures, at the same time while conforming largely to unquestioning modes of discourse, such as popularized history and romance fiction. Individual writers have attempted to adjust to socio-political circumstances. This study includes 4 close studies of individual texts. Such close stylistic attention serves to underline the textually constructed nature of both the figure of Shaka and the selves of the writer. So, the most important thing I think he says here is categorically that there has been significant romanticizing and bedeviling of the nature of Shaka. And I once again proved that it's impossible that Shaka could have murdered anybody or engaged in warfare, rightly or wrongly. And I'm not in favor of anything but the truth. He could not have killed more than anywhere between 100 to 150,000 people. It is physically, it is scientifically, it is historically impossible. There were just not that many people there, and Shaka just never won so many battles. It's as simple as that. It is as simple as that. Shaka evidently and unapologetically has been used as a scapegoat. And now if you look at this picture as you see here now, you're seeing once again that Afriforum in the year 2018 is trying to use the mythology, the revisionist, racist revisionist history of uShaka again by trying to get themselves close to Nkosi Goodwill Zwelithini, by using this narrative, this racist narrative, which has got no bearing in reality. I just want to close with this very, very important thing, and I think this spells out very clearly the mythology of the entire issue. So, just in my final conclusion, this is a very interesting. This was a piece which appeared in 2007 in IOL newspaper, and it said the fight for Zulu kingship. And this was 2007, 11 years ago. At a meeting of the extended House of Traditional Leadership in Ulundi on Thursday, Buthelezi unveiled a list of senior traditional leaders who have lodged their grievances with the Commission of Traditional Leadership, claims in dispute. But listen carefully. Buthelezi said the list of claimants was given to him by Goodwill in the list of those who are among us as traditional leaders in KwaZulu-Natal, claiming that they're entitled to the same title as kings in their own right. Look at this. Here we got Mr. Khadebe of the Amatlubi. We got the Ngwane clan. We've got the Nguni clan. We got the Amazizi clan. So if Shaka killed off all of these people, why are they still there? Why are their clans still there intact? So just to finally wrap this up. I know this has been long, but I think it deserves this kind of attention. There is no doubt in my mind that Shaka was a fall guy. Shaka was an African hero. Because Shaka was organized, and he flew in the face of the disorganized, savage beast, unthinking beast that the white mentality was very comfortable with, because if somebody lacks intelligence and is treated as a human being, it's very easy to wipe them out. And this is what I think we've proven over the last 3-4 videos, that it was indeed the Afrikaner that was engaged, and together of course at many points along the way, that the Afrikaner that was engaged in the genocide of our people, beginning with the Khoi and the San in the Western Cape, the Xhosa, the Zulu, the Sotho, Tswana, Pedi, every single tribe that they attacked, they left thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of our people dead. And this series is more about exposing the truth. And my final one tomorrow, it'll only be in 1 week's time. My final one will be about the land issue, speaking directly to Afriforum, and all of the fallacious issues and revisionism that they will do, that they've tried to put forward and promulgate. So I'd like those of you that spend your time watching this to use this as reference. I again challenge the racist lunatic fringe, the neo-Nazi knobheads. Please feel free to attack this as you wish. The truth doesn't care about what you think. The truth doesn't care about how much likes or dislikes there is. The truth is just what it is. I thank you very much, and I greet you with revolutionary greetings from the beating heart of Africa, right here in Lagos, Nigeria. Amandla.